Meena has been described as the independent one-woman agit-prop literary political movement. She is a poet, writer, translator, and anti-caste activist, and an academic, now based in India. Her extensive corpus includes two poetry collections, Touch and Ms Militancy, as well as three novels, The Gypsy Goddess, the the Women's Short Prize shortlisted When I Hit You from 2017, and Exquisite Cadavers, which is this one right here in my hand. In 2022, she was elected as a Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and was also awarded the PEN Hermann Kesten Prize for her writing and work as a fearless fighter for democracy, human rights, and the free world. Her latest book, published by Juggernaut, is Tomorrow Someone Will Arrest You, which is this one right here. So we're going to be talking about lots of things, and there is a huge amount to talk about. But Meena, before we jump in, uh, can you tell us a little bit beyond this kind of very formal introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you like? You just moved back from the UK, is that right?
Yeah, I moved back 4 years ago, three and a
four
half
years
years
ago.
ago, I think. So yeah. So anyway, thank you for having me here, and it's lovely to meet all of you. And I don't know what to say about myself.
What do you like? What food do you like? Let's start with that. What's your favorite food?
Oh God. Uh, well, I think I like. I mean, I like all food, but I am generally a kind of rice addict. I
Ah,
can't.
okay.
I can't do anything unless I have some rice every day. Uh,
Okay. All right.
Not
And
a big.
and,
Not,
and you're
yes.
you're you're a Tamilian, right?
Yeah, in Tamil. Yeah.
Okay, great. So, okay, so let me move it forward and make it a little bit more interesting for some of the
That's
people here.
more interesting than me eating rice. So please.
So, what I want to share is a very quick screenshot of uh, just 1 minute. Just 1 minute. I want to pull up an image. So, this is really from your book, the Exquisite Cadavers. And the Exquisite Cadavers is a bit of an experiment. And I read the background, and you talked about how the book that you had written before that was not a memoir, but people made it out to be a memoir. So you wrote Exquisite Cadavers in this particular format very intentionally because you wanted it to be a non-memoir, and you wanted to separate the memoir from the novel very specifically. And so I took the liberty of doing a very quick scan of part of the book, and I wanted to share that actually with everyone here. So I'm just pulling that up. But while I'm doing that, can you talk a little bit about that decision-making process and why you did it the way you did?
Okay. So it was quite an interesting book. I think a lot of the time writing is received based on the way people look at people in society, right? So, for instance, when you're a woman writing, um, people often flatten it out and assume that it's always based on your story. They always assume that it's autobiographical, and it may not be a wrong assumption to make, but very often I find that in general, compared to, let's say, my male peers, the idea is that we find that women's writing is seen often as autobiographical, or the stamp of autobiography, almost as if that women's entire imagination is requisite, or is predicated upon their experience. And I think yesterday it was very interesting because, for instance, very unrelated to this, I was reading this interview by Adanya Shibli, the Palestinian novelist, and she says something that when people try to find within fiction, how much is real, um, how much is truly happened, how much is the memoir, she calls it a kind of violence inflicted upon the human imagination. And I find that that kind of thing also really happens. And especially like if you're like the way I wrote this book called When I Hit You, there was this entire assumption that, it was easier for them to, assume that everything about it was like, read it as a memoir. And for me, it was not the fact that none of the book was not true. The problem was that, if I call it a novel, we should call it a novel, that the writer should have the agency to decide what she calls her writing. That
Right.
So if I write something and say, this is my diary, you cannot come and tell me, no, this is a poem. Or I write a poem and you cannot come and tell me, oh, this is a short story, right? Like even that like little agency to define. So I think Exquisite Cadavers is a very interesting experiment that came immediately afterwards. Was that because what is it that makes fiction? What is it that differentiates fiction from a diary? So I think one of those things that lead to that process of differentiation is that there is this process of alchemy in which you take the raw materials of the story, you give it a structure, you give it narrative, you make it plausible, you make it relatable. And when somebody tells you that this is a memoir as opposed to a work of fiction, they are basically trying to uh, reduce all your process. They're trying to take away what you have done with it. They're just
Right.
pretending that you are transcribing what happened. So Exquisite Cadavers was the kind of experiment where, if you have seen the screen that Chetan
Yes.
was just sharing,
I
it's
can share
very
it again very
no,
quickly.
it's fine. The left margins. I have the book, I think, once.
Yeah.
What actually happens is that you have a left margin here and there's a story here. So the left margins are the story that is happening in my life, and on the right is the kind of story that I'm projecting, because I don't want to say that what I write has nothing to do with my life. There are experiences that happen in my life, and in some way they influence the characters I'm writing. So the story is about a Tunisian filmmaker, Karim, and he's married to this British woman called Maya, uh, who is a designer, a layout artist. And the book, I mean, there are things that I go through in my couple. For instance, like we were living in Britain, just going through Brexit. My partner's a European, and like there was so much anti-European sentiment at that point. And the way this was affecting our life and the way it was getting projected in fiction, because of course nobody's a European, but you find a lot of Islamophobia playing out. So it's like you go through a certain set of and again, another thing was, in my personal life, the book was being written in 2018, and one of my good friends, Rona Wilson, got arrested under the UAPA. And the part of the Bhima Koregaon case. And when this is happening, the characters in the novel also take a turn, because Karim, who's a filmmaker, finds that he has to go back home because his brother has been picked up by the Tunisian police, because the Tunisian police, after the Arab Revolution, becomes more and more oppressive, and they start a crackdown on actors and artists and activists. So it's like, it was like maintaining a diary of your life. And it's very interesting, even as the writer, to see the process, right, of what happens in your life and how that gets distilled into fiction, how it gets projected into fiction. What do you put in? What do you leave out? So yeah, that explains the book.
All right. Great.
Yeah,
So
should I answer the questions that are coming in the window, or do we
no,
talk?
we'll come to those questions afterwards. We'll go through a set of questions of our own first. So
Oh,
the
sure,
next question I wanted to talk about was your Herald, Deccan Herald quote from today. So I
Oh
already
yes.
shared it in the group. We are all part of a WhatsApp group. But in your interview today, you said, it's a longer paragraph, but you say, and this is how tomorrow someone will arrest you came into being. Being considered a political poet comes with a lot of baggage, especially in a society which wants to outsource all its political intellectualism to men. As a woman who writes poetry, you are an easier commodity to handle when you're crying about a long ago heartbreak. You're a dangerous liability when you're a critic of the regime. A publisher declined to distribute my book in India, citing legal risks. Patriarchy is insane. Its impulses to shun and control women take myriad forms. Now, that's I just love that, and it also says a lot about you, and of course, it tells us a little bit about Juggernaut because they have finally taken this book out. So tell us a little bit about working with Juggernaut and what it means. And so can we, was it a woman to woman thing or what was going on here?
Oh no, and it was very interesting because, see, my publisher in the UK has consistently been Atlantic for the last 10 years. I've been published often by the Big Four, but I decided to go with an independent publisher because I don't want my message to be diluted, my writing to be diluted, what I stand for to be diluted. And Atlantic Publishers has a deal that, any book that they publish by default gets distributed by Penguin in India. And so the day, like a week before this book was going to be released, Penguin writes to my agent and says, there's a massive legal risk of distribution. And so they say we can't distribute it. And this is hugely problematic because, it's the last minute. And the book got released in May 23 in the UK, and we just couldn't distribute it in India. And then we were like, my agent was like, I'm going to shop it around. I'm going to send it to others. And then other corporate publishers were interested. But then I said, no, I want to go with Chiki Sarkar because, at the end of the day, she's an independent publisher and she stands and she has a lot of spine. And the problem is that the corporates have huge resources. They have huge money. They can do the legal battle. But the thing is precisely because they have so much money, they don't want to prejudice their operations, So They don't want to stand up for what, they don't want to stand up for this. And I faced the same, very similar problems when I was publishing Varavara Rao's book, for instance. There was a lot of censorship, and it was not even coming from the editors. And that's the most important thing. People who are making these decisions of censorship are not the editors, not the publishers. They're not the people who actually read books. The people who take these decisions are the legal team, the marketing team, the advisory team, who decide that, this could be adverse publicity, who decide this could lead to litigation, and therefore don't want you to enter that space. So that's one of those things. The other thing is that I often, like on the one hand, this comment about, that was an essay actually, it was not an interview. This comment about, the fact that we outsource all the political intellectualism to men is something I've really observed. I think that there's an inbuilt bias, and I'm not crying because I really love the kind of attention and the audience and the readership I have received. But I always find that, at the end of the day, we still are a society that for thousands of years did not allow women to have knowledge, right? Like a lot of knowledge was within, at least Hindu society, only given to upper caste men and not even to women. So the problem is when women, are taking up that space, that very critical space, and it's not just the writing space, the space of being a commentator on public, the space of being the public intellectual. I think there's like an entire nervousness that builds around it, right? Like you've never seen women in these roles. You never, like, women are supposed to be governed. We're supposed to be subjects. The fact that, you have a say, I think that completely, destabilizes the system. And so it's quite interesting to be at that space where, how do they handle you? And so, yeah, I think Juggernaut has been great for me, and they have published. And, she also published, interestingly, Chiki also published my other very strong work, the When I Hit You, the book on domestic violence. So I've had a great relationship with Juggernaut as a publishing house. And it's very interesting because until I met Chiki only after I published both the books with her. So it's not like, you're like, oh, we are all friends, we hang out together, we go and have drinks, and therefore she publishes me. I mean, this is where I mean, honestly, I'm one of those writers who doesn't believe in networking, You don't have to go meet the right people, make the right noises, Like people with like minds will always find you and will always nourish your work. So yeah, and this is not a joke. I mean, like, she published my first book in 2017. She published my second book in 24, and I met her only like this April.
Oh wow!
So it's just you just work on the realm of words and things. So yeah,
it's beautiful, nice. That's so nice to hear. But it's interesting. You mentioned the word being a public intellectual. Now, and you obviously stand for something, and by and large, I agree with what you stand for, and that's what we are also about. But there is also a counter narrative, which is also literary, which is available. So I recently read this book called Agit-prop by Kunal Purohit. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And so the full name of the book is Agit-prop, The Secretive World of Hindutva Pop Stars. And it actually profiles 3 specific people. One is a singer-songwriter who's very big on YouTube. The other is a poet. And the third is a publisher, an author turned publisher. And they are all, and the third guy is so far right that he is broken off from the BJP and created his own party, which is further right than where the BJP stands for. Okay. So there is a narrative, but the difference between what you're doing and what's happening there is that your English, your intellectual, and you're being read by So in a sense, and I don't mean to be dismissive, but in a sense, you're kind of preaching to the choir, or you're reinforcing pre-existing notions. Whereas with these people, they are probably changing minds. They're probably impacting opinion. They are being able to shift opinion. So yeah, I love that smile. Tell me what you're thinking.
Hey, this is very is such an insult to this is a this is an insult to both my intelligence and the audience intelligence. No,
Okay.
no, no. For instance, I don't know, like at least 30, 35 universities, like central universities, state universities have me on their syllabus. Which
Yes.
means that literally I go to any festival, literature festival, I go to any book signing. There's always somebody coming and saying, I read you in my college, I read you in my university. And
Lovely.
we cannot look at, and in a country like India, where education is often mediated through, institutions, you cannot say that, people are not reading. A lot of first generation people are actually accessing literature through the university system. They are actually accessing books through the university system. So, and unlike a lot of writers, I'm also, for instance, available online, so, and part of, I think I wrote a long article in Tank magazine 5 or 6 years ago, arguing for pretty much the same thing, saying that, a book doesn't change things. A book takes 5 years to change things. So if you have to
Yes.
counter a narrative, you have to be where the fascists are. You cannot counter fascists by saying, in 5 years' time, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to change your mind. I mean,
Right.
I agree with you in that sense. I'm not saying, I mean, that's where I don't want to reduce myself to just a book writer. So I'm like,
Right.
I'm on Twitter. I get, I don't know, like a couple of, like just last week, I had like 3-4 million views on my Twitter page, which I think is like huge. It's not the audience I have, but it's the kind of viewership I get. So it does
Sure.
mean that if you have to fight fascism, you have to do it where the fascists are. So if they are
Right.
doing this in like 280 characters, you also have to go and challenge whatever is being said in the same space. Because I think the life cycle of publishing, especially publishing books, is too much. Books are great knowledge. There's no question. There's no doubt about it. They're great knowledge. But we have to give counters, which is why I think of somebody like Dhruv Rathi, for instance. You can talk. I'm not saying I'm Dhruv Rathi, but look at what Dhruv Rathi is doing. Like he is
Right.
changing the narrative, and
Sure.
he's a formidable challenge. And you have several such. Like I come from Tamil Nadu. You're also part of India. And where is the presence of the BJP? Where is the presence of that kind of a hate politics? It doesn't exist because we have a
Right.
very healthy intellectual ecosystem. So, I don't, what I think is actually the other way around.
Okay.
And what I want to say is that for a longest time, the left has had an intellectual tradition in this country. The
Right.
anti-caste movements have had an intellectual tradition in this country. The Ambedkarite movements have had, and the Periyarist movements have had an intellectual tradition in this country. It is
Right.
only now that the RSS is making its small baby inroads.
Right.
So that's what I would like. So they are the ones trying to imitate, like in Tamil Nadu, it's very interesting. Like I went to Coimbatore and was covering the elections. And the author Perumal Murugan, whom you heard about,
Yes.
got to
Of
talk,
course.
he was telling me that how is the BJP now trying to, like RSS trying to do? They're trying to copy the old communist model, like the communist model where students are like, okay, let's go on a trip, let's have a 2-day symposium, let's talk about, we'll be talking about Che Guevara, about Cuba or something. Now they're like, okay, they're trying to imitate the similar models, sports competitions, singing competitions, youth clubs. So who is learning from whom? I don't think there is any necessity for the mainstream to imitate the right. It's the right that is imitating, the technical agit-prop methods of the left.
All right. Okay. So
Okay, sorry,
I
I had
know,
to take
no,
the
no, no.
time.
I know the question was a little provocative. I love the answer. That's why I asked the question, because otherwise, these conversations can be very boring. And I don't want, I mean, you stand for so much. So I didn't want it to just go off like a ship in the night. So I was reading another quote because I was thinking about, activism, and I was talking about so many people who are activists who also are doing non-fiction writing. And I was going to ask you, why are you doing poetry and translation when you should be doing non-fiction? But then, folks, I read this article in the Hindu where again Meena was interviewed, and I'm just going to read 4 lines of what was part of your response, and then I want you to speak a little bit more because I think this is just so beautifully put. So. So she says, purely from a political communication perspective, we need to combat false propaganda with data points, historical analysis, fact checks, first person testimonials, ground reports, and such like. A poem cannot be birthed at the factual level. That sort of stenography would lead itself to a banality. So, talk to us about that.
Yeah, yeah. So this is also quite interesting, actually, because uh, so until I left the country around 2013 or 14, and when I stayed in India, and then I lived abroad for a while, and then couple many years, and then I came back. So until I was living here, I was writing regularly for India Today. I was writing regularly columns for Outlook. People who are possibly older or like might know about this. And I was also writing online, blogs and all this. So I was constantly writing op-eds and what I would call non-fiction. And then, for instance, when I was in the UK, I decided to do so. I have written for the Guardian, the New York Times, Al Jazeera. So I've written a lot of nonfiction. And then at some point, I also decided to do long form nonfiction. Like I was very affected by what happened in 2009 in Tamil Eelam, where there was a huge genocide that happened.
Yeah.
169,000 Tamil people were massacred 15 years ago in May. So I went and because it's not only the genocide that happened. After the genocide, the female combatants, for instance, the LTTE or the Tamil Tigers, had 1/3 of the fighting forces were women. So not all of them were killed, right? Many of them were captured. So for me, it was very imperative what happened to these fighters who were captured. Because now the resistance doesn't exist. And so I went and interviewed them, and like after they had escaped life in the camps, and the kind of systematic rapes they underwent, the kind of torture they underwent, what it took for them to go and get asylum, how the society treated them, and it was very interesting. So that came out as a book called "The Orders Were to Rape You." Female digresses, and then I trace the history of when the female enrollment started and all of this. So for me, I do nonfiction. But again, the question here is there are, I think, two reasons why my nonfiction is not very visible. One is that not because I don't like nonfiction. One is that what I observe in life, maybe three reasons. The first is there is an extremely shrinking space. So the same people who would ask me to write, like India Today would die for me to write, or Outlook, and sometimes I would have to write the same week for two of these people. Or
Right.
Barka Dutt would want me on her channel, somebody else would want me. That entire mainstream space has started shrinking in the 10 years. You cannot say by how much. It's not like, I have become more popular as a writer, but doesn't mean that the venues to write have expanded. They have actually shrunk. So these are people who are critical of the regime. These are people who are leftist. These are people who are like this and that. And then you don't get any space. So that avenue, where do you write nonfiction? You cannot write, if you want to write nonfiction on Twitter, you write your tweet, right? Like if you want to write like 600 words, 800 words. And then the other problem is that there are a lot of websites that, like for instance, independent online websites for whom I've written. But then the problem is that the only way you get your article to circulate, because they are not have print circulation, is for you to tweet about it. So the shortcut is rather just tweet about it yourself than to publish a third place and tweet, So it's just too much effort, too much work. And then the first thing is the shrinking space. And the second thing that I've always observed when it comes to this climate is also that, like sometimes there are two ways in which you can handle an idea. One is that are people even reading 1,200 words, or are they just responding to tweets and Instagrams and reels? And I believe that the attention economy means that people are reading and responding much more to sharp, quickly argued points, and not even in the format. The second question is the kind of question that comes with being a writer. If you want to write about, let's say, female sexuality and fascism, can you write that in 800 words, or do you want to dwell with it in the topic of a longer, a book? Do you want to work with it, in the framework of something bigger? So you always have to choose. I think so. This is the second. This is the second thing for me, and the third thing for me is this really interesting work that this author, the one who wrote "Desperately Seeking Shahrukh," what's the name?
Sharanya.
Yeah, she's doing, which is she's even under this climate, right? Like the space is shrinking. She has done this tabulation of how many women get op-ed space and how many men get it.
Right.
Apparently, it's like 85% of the op-ed writers happen to be men.
Right.
So again, it's a question of, like, how does gender imbalances play into all this? And it's not a joke. And this is like, she really puts this number. She goes through Indian Express, she goes through Hindu, she goes through everyone and says, why is it always that a certain type of, middle class, like whatever, retiring or, middle-aged men, why are they the ones who are writing? Why is it no, why are there no voices? Why is there no diversity? So it's, the question of your viewpoint, the question of who you are, the question of what message you want. So it's all of these things which affect. But also the other thing is, as a writer, you want to say something. But I mean, a lot of people from the outside would think, oh, she's so prolific. But I've always been somebody who's felt that I should write only if I want to put my name on something, only when it's like really perfect.
Yes.
Only when I don't want to just go and say, okay, I don't want to weigh in on everything. I don't want to weigh in on, okay, Modi says something here, Amit Shah says something here, the finance minister says something here. You cannot be weighing in on everything, right? So unless I really want to say something and it's making a solid contribution, I would rather, just tweet or use social media for it. So, but I do like nonfiction. And the other thing is, on top of all of these, social related issues, also a very personal issue, which is that I became a mother a couple of years ago. So my 8 years ago, and I have 2 children, which also means the kind of headspace you have. Do you have the time to write 800 words, or do you have the time to send your children to school on time, get stuff organized on time? And then I think that the quick turnaround that's required is something that you sometimes choose not to do. You'd be like, no, this is just too much for me to take on at the moment. So there will be a time. There will be a time when you can contribute the way you want to contribute. So it's all of these are moving parts. So it's never one thing. It's always a combination of many things.
Fair. Well, thank you for that. I have like 5 more questions that I'd come up with, but then I want to respect that the audience also have a lot of questions. But before we move to those, I want to ask you a few questions which are like a rapid fire thing. Okay, I'm just going to ask you questions and tell me answer from the top of your head. So, what's your favorite? What's your favorite place to write?
My bed.
Your
I
bed.
have a table and all, but I write from my bed. Yeah.
Yeah, I read about that somewhere. Then, what's your favorite time to write? Night time, late in the night?
Favorite time, often it used to be late at night, but nowadays it's much more like when the children are not home, when they're in school, so that it's quiet and I can write.
Right. Okay. You mentioned Che Guevara. So, who do you think is the most epic revolutionary or activist ever?
Lenin, I think.
Lenin. Okay. Your favorite poet, not including yourself?
Oh, I'm not my favorite poet. I like Kamala Das a lot.
Okay. All right. Great. If you remember this off the top of your head, what is one of your own metaphors that you like a lot?
Was that?
What is one of your own metaphors that you like a lot?
I don't have such an inflated sense of myself, so it's okay.
No, but anything, anyone that sticks that you remember that you like a lot. I'm not saying it has to be like the best, but just one that you like.
No.
You had so many in this book also. You had so many in Exquisite Cadavers. I mean, I can tell you some that I liked.
That's okay. I can like it. No.
No? Okay. All right. Okay, let's move to the questions that people have
I'm too
for you.
modest for that, yeah.
Okay. I'll move to the questions. So I will just skim through them, and if there's their repetition or something, I'll just read them for you. The first one is from Shraddha. She says, such a pleasure to meet you. How do you navigate writing about deeply personal and traumatic experiences with such passion and fearlessness and authenticity, while ensuring that your work doesn't hurt those closest to you? Or does it? Maybe it does.
No, a lot of people who are very close to me, my partner, my parents and all, they have very intensely private lives, right? So sometimes my partner says, oh, are you putting me in this book? And then I'm like, I just have to diplomatically smile. But I think the question here is that those who really care about you, wouldn't mind if you mention them. And the second thing is that except for one book, most of my work doesn't involve, the personal space itself. Then I read a lot of poetry. Most of the poems are in that sense read as my life, which it is. and which I also own up to. And I think that, I mean, if you really love them, you protect somebody. If they really love you, they'll understand why you're writing about them. So it really depends on how much they have your back. And also, I think people have to, in that sense, you know, I mean, like if you're somebody who makes everything about yourself, then you'll be very upset. But if you're somebody who sees this, you know, as part of the flow, then you just be like, well, you know, just take it very lightly. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. The next question is interesting. I think it's true for all writers, but anyway, I'll read it out. Hi, it's from Sumanya Velamur. She's saying, "Hi, Meena, big fan of Gypsy Goddess, particularly. I love the narrative. Do you ever feel like you're being self-indulgent when you do the things you do with narrative? If you do, how do you resolve it?"
So the thing is, I don't know if we can call it self-indulgence, or if it may be self-indulgence. But self-indulgence is something that comes from a position of both power, being mollycoddled, you know, somebody who's privileged, that they can, you know, like think and be proud of themselves, or, you know, be narcissistic. But I think my writing, a lot of it is metafiction. A lot of it tries to break down the wall of the idea that, you know, this is fiction. That this is, I don't want any reader to say, okay, this is real, because I want people to say this is constructed reality. I want you to see how the reality is being constructed. I want you to know the politics of this construction. I want you to deconstruct this construction even as you're reading it. So I don't think it's self-indulgence as much as it is a kind of understanding that, you know, like there is no non-political story, that, you know, there's no non-political narrative. Like every narrative has its own politics, what voices you choose, how you frame a story, who becomes the central character, like everything is so steeped in politics. And I would just call it, I think, a higher level of self-awareness, as opposed to being self-indulgent.
Okay, fair enough.
But I also think that the self-indulgent that you might refer is the idea of being playful, and I also think that that's a big thing, that, you know, you are writing also in the sense that, you know, it's a pleasant experience for you, and that the person that you enjoy you doing what you're doing. And I think that if when you enjoy something, it's always playful, right?
Yeah.
So
next question is from Jessica. She's saying, you're currently judging. You can see how you want to answer it. You're currently judging for the Queen Mary Vasifuri Prize in the poetry category. As a judge, what kind of poems do you look for?
Jessica, I'm looking for the poems that you are writing. No,
Jessica, now you need to write a poem. Jessica is part of our team, by the way, so she handles social media for us.
Thank you.
All right, Swati has a question. How do you structure time to write with your activism or work that takes you away from your desk?
No, I'm not a very structured person. I mean, I'm a workhorse, but I am unable to do timetables and structures. So, and I also have, like, you know, as I said, children, which makes it very impossible to even find small blocks of time, because by the time you find a 3-hour block, there are 100 people emailing you and you have to respond to them. And then, you know, there's the social media, then you cannot write, because sometimes it takes these hours to just get into that headspace, right? Even to get into the headspace of, like, just to look at what you have written, that takes like half a day. If you're working on a book, for instance, just to go back into the zone, to know what you were doing before, it takes half a day, and then you're going to find the mood, then you got to do the research. I mean, I don't structure time, but what I used to do earlier was, and, you know, when I used to really struggle, my partner is like very understanding. He'd be like, so I'd go away for like 2 days to, you know, another hotel in the same city and just check in and, you know, just sit alone and write, because you need that block of time. And it's like, I mean, I don't mind coming back and overworking, doing all the mothering for the next 2 days, next 3 days, the rest of the week. But the time, you know, like, is so important, because you cannot write in snatches.
Yes.
You can tweet in snatches. You cannot write in snatches. You need that liquid time. So, and you also need continuity, right? Like, you don't want to sound like, you know, one person today and another person tomorrow. So you also need to get the voice, all of that, right? So I think that's how, I mean, like, I now realize, I mean, now I'm going to be 40. So I now realize the wealth of time that I had in my 20s, you know, this golden block of time where, you know, you just could do what you wanted to do. You didn't have to sleep any night. Nowadays, if you don't sleep for a single night, you're like, the whole week is ruined. You have migraines, you have health issues. And when you're younger, you have that really that privilege of time to both read and to write. I think when you're older, you'll have to make that effort and find time. So yeah, it's quite. I also feel that I write very well on planes. I don't know why. Because there's no internet or there's no distraction, like I write well in
Yes.
airports, I write very well in crowded places because I'm very good at switching off the world. So I think it's, for me, it's less a question of structuring time as much as just, getting the discipline to and
Fair enough.
snatching the time. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Uh, the next question is, what's the story behind the cover design of Tomorrow Someone Will Arrest You? That's Tomorrow Someone Will Arrest You. It is intriguing. How was it ideated? Tell us about
Oh
it.
yeah, so I mean, no, I think Juggernaut does a lot of good covers, so they send me a lot of choices. Um, there was one that was, like really Hitchcock type of cover. There was another cover which was again interesting, but I was like, okay, we decided to pick this one because it's got this graffiti quality to it, but
Yeah.
also like white is a color that jumps out kind of thing, brings out the desperation of what's going to happen, bold lettering. So I don't have much to do with the covers, so it's always a publisher's decision.
Okay, great. Um, does some part of you ever struggle to write the heartbreaking work? It must be a lot of emotional labor. How do you steel yourself for it?
Oh, I think the thing is that you have to be a little bit, I mean, one has to be very ruthless with oneself, like if you start thinking, oh, this happened to me, how sad I am. So, I'm so power, I went through so much hurt. I mean, then you become the victim, no? And then you cannot do anything. And I think the only way out of it, I mean, and it's not only my own sorrows, because a lot of people think because I wrote about domestic violence, that, that because I have suffered, I must struggle to write. That's easier to write when you have struggled. Like, for instance, in the first book, it's about a massacre of 44 people who were burnt to death because they were striking for higher wages. And how do you write about a tragedy like that? How do you write about genocide? How do you write about the rapes after genocide? And I always feel that, writing other people's trauma is far more traumatic than your own. And the only way is to, be true to their story, be true to what you're trying to say. Don't allow your emotional component, because your emotional component doesn't do anything. Your emotional component can help you with a lot of things. It can help you go to the site of protest. Your emotional component can allow you to take risks. So if somebody's going to come after you for writing about the tigers or writing about the resistance or something, you're like, I'm invested enough to fight for this. So that emotion can give you courage. But
Right.
emotion cannot write a beautiful sentence. Emotion cannot write a compelling sentence. To write a compelling sentence, you really need very strong arguments. So I think that's where I come from. Like emotion is good. Emotion makes you like passionate, everything, but that doesn't feed into the writing. Like people will dismiss it as propaganda. They will dismiss it as like hysteric. You don't want to be hysteric. You
Yeah.
want to be rational. You want to be making very powerful arguments that nobody can fight with. So I actually don't. I mean, everything around it is about emotion. Trying to get it on time, trying to get it into the world, trying your best to put it forward. All of that risk taking, all of that is emotional. Like the writing itself, no. I'm not. I'm a very cold person. I think that way.
Well, we'll talk about that offline. Next question is Madhu Padma. She's saying, I'm writing a book on Hindu extremism. How can I protect myself legally, physically, and on social media while navigating this sensitive topic?
Oh, what advice? What advice I can give? I don't know. I think you have to be. See, the problem is, Madhu, you have done the first part of the dare. You started writing. That means that after that, the question is, you're going to face whatever comes. I mean, unless you have the courage, you wouldn't have taken up this topic, right? So, I think the legal protection would have to come from your publisher. Your physical protection. I mean, like for a long time, I would never announce any of my events beforehand. I always would post photos like 3 days after, 4 days after, and my public. I mean, like everybody who's doing my events gets very upset. Like, why doesn't she announce it? Because they think your audience is less. But I'm like, literally announcing an event is deciding to call hell upon yourself, because people can come, people can protest, people can hurt you, right? So in some ways, you have to be like, be aware of the risks that can happen. Um, and then
The other question, which I skipped actually, was which description is closest to your heart? Writer, poet, activist, academician, or others which you flawlessly carry?
I don't know. I'm right now. I think the description is I'm a thug mom. I think I'm largely a mother who writes at this point.
So I love that phrase. So what do you mean by thug mom? The one who's stealing time from their from her children whenever she finds? What do you mean by that?
What's a thug mom? I don't know. Like, I mean, I would think a thug mom is somebody who. I mean, one of those things about motherhood is that nobody tells you how dangerous it is, because and how much of thinking on your feet it involves, how much of because you're losing your personhood, right? In putting something into another person, you're constantly erasing yourself, you're constantly taking away parts of yourself. And even too, because sometimes I sit with my children and I watch them play, and believe me, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. But
Yeah.
I can actually feel my brain cells fossilize in real time. I'm like, because you're not doing something, that can spark yourself. So how do you retain yourself even as you are giving away so much of yourself? I mean, like, that being yourself and being a mother at the same time. I think that's what it's to be a thug mom. I mean, you don't have to be like, okay, I destroyed myself, I sacrificed myself, I don't exist because I'm a mother. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be, and I'm also going to be a mom. So I think that
Right.
not losing individuality is like, what we should do.
You have this beautiful poem in your book, The Wars Come Home, which is about being a mom and watching your child. And then in the end, you build in Alan Kurdi, and that was really heartbreaking. I love that poem.
Yeah.
But Jessica has has said exactly what I was thinking, where she said that come to our retreat and you'll write just as well as write on a plane. Thank you for answering. So that's something I'll discuss with you offline, but I'd love to have you come up and teach for us if you'd be open to that.
Oh, where in Uttarakhand are you based, by the way?
We are about 40 minutes from Mukteshwar, if you're familiar with Mukteshwar. We're in Nainital district, but we're not on the map. We're a little village, and it's an offbeat location. But yes, we'd love to have.
No, I was in Uttarakhand like 10, 12 years ago trying to shoot a Malayalam movie.
Okay.
So, because it was right after the floods. So we were trying to make some environmentally conscious Malayalam art cinema where nobody speaks for like 3 minutes and then somebody says something.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit familiar with the beauty of the landscape and also the bad construction or whatever. But yeah, I would like to come again. Things must have changed a lot in 10 years. So.
Yeah, and we are not on the side. There are two parts to Uttarakhand, Garhwal and Kumaon. So the floods all mostly happened in Garhwal. We're in Kumaon.
Yeah, that's where I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
On the other side, yeah.
Yeah, but things have changed, and yes, we'd love to have you. Coming to our next question, I don't want to short circuit that. So, what are your guilty pleasure books? I love that question.
Oh, what are my guilty pleasure books? Yeah. It's very interesting. I used to read a lot of John Grisham when I was younger, but that must be like 20 years ago, So I mean, I used to read pulp, but yeah, I mean I think I stopped at some point. I think my big pleasure is that I read much more non-fiction than I read fiction. So,
okay, not very guilty, but okay, we'll work with that.
Not very guilty, but yeah, this primarily a lot of my reading is that. I think my guilty pleasure must actually be JSTOR or something. Reading some academic paper or the other.
Oh my God. If that's a guilty pleasure, तो फिर तो बहुत problem है life में हम लोग के. Okay. Who or what has been your inspiration for writing? You're really fired up, and what you write is brilliant. And of course, I would love to have a question about editing, but I don't know if you have the time. But is there a particular inspiration, or is it just what you feel? And like you said, what you feel is your emotions, but then there is a craft and the way that you meld these words and make them into what they are. Such gorgeous writing. So maybe if not about this emotion, maybe you can talk about the craft, but something that inspires you.
Oh no, inspiration. No, I'm influenced, of course, by good literature, but like everybody else. But
Yes.
The good thing with good literature is that there are lovely books to read. Doesn't mean you should also go and write. I'm very happy. You'd be very happy just being a reader and reading all of them. I think. I think my writing was much more about it was a very specific time I started writing. This was late 90s, early 2000s. And like Tamil Nadu was having all these caste atrocities, and not a lot of it was getting written about. And then I come from the Delta district, in Tamil Nadu, the Kaveri Delta, and then like big massacres like Kilvenmani have happened, but you don't find that in history books. And also like you feel that there's a lot of absences, right? Like that not a lot of, like, or for instance, in Tamil Nadu in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of support, and still there's a lot of support for the independence struggle in Sri Lanka, the Tamil independence struggle in Tamil struggle.
Yes.
But again, in the mainstream media, in the North Indian media, they don't know anything. No, they just know this is. They just call everybody terrorist, and that's the end of the story.
Yeah.
The reason why the struggle happened, the reason why people felt the need for a homeland, what they went through, why, or so it's like sometimes you have to insert yourself and tell, okay, this is a story I want to say, because the common public perception is not addressing this, and nobody is also like. I mean, like, the thing is, you do have journalists, but journalists are only reporting facts. They're not trying to shift perception. They're not trying to argue for things. And I was not happy just, like being that kind of a journalist. I also wanted to, like write to change. So I think that's a little bit of inspiration.
Great. Next question. Every time I write, I can't help but think about the people who are going to be unhappy with it. It makes me censor a lot. What are some tips to navigate the critical voice inside your inner critic?
Arushi, this is for poetry or this is for prose, Arushi?
Prose.
Okay. I mean, see, the thing is, if you want to make people happy, you wouldn't be writing, right? Like, I mean, writing is a very, is not the most.
I love that.
So yeah, eventually it's a question of how do you balance. But I also think that in so many ways, we all censor ourselves, or we are like. But I always, from my experience, I can say that you think something will worry somebody, but actually in the end, they're far less worried than what you anticipate them to be worried. That's
Right.
one of those things. And the other thing is that, I mean, luckily or unluckily, I've never been with somebody who is like a reader, like who reads my work. Like, my partner reads a lot of books, but he doesn't. I don't think he's read the last 3-4 books. So he's been busy in his life, and I don't see. The thing is that you are with somebody in your life, or people close to you, not because they are like your fans and readers and your audience. I mean, that's separate. You're with people because they support you, they bring so much to your life, and they understand you, and like you both believe in like some shared ideal, and therefore I think that if you manage to keep that distance, then there is no, I mean, like, for me at least, I was lucky in that way. So I have never discussed my writing with somebody I was in a relationship with. But part of it was to protect myself, because the thing is, they are not professionals, right? People who are involved with you, your family, your brother, sister, mother, boyfriend, lover, they're not professionals. Whatever they say, it's either going to be too good or they're going to hurt you and say negative stuff. So you leave opinion on your writing, the reception of your writing, the criticism to the professionals. Leave it to your editors, leave it to your agent. And your relationship and life, I mean, in that sense, maybe it is a setback to me, but I never look at it like that, because it's allowed me this I mean, like, tomorrow I stop being a writer, I just go to teaching full time, or I don't know, I do something else in my life. I have my entire structure intact, like my family, my loved ones, my friendships, my activist friends, everything is intact. Nothing would change, a little bit also, so it depends on who you go to. So
okay, cool, got it. Thank you, that's very helpful.
But
Last
also,
question.
Arushi, I mean, the thing is, you talked about the people. If it's people who are close to you, this is what my answer is. But if it's people in general, I mean, I piss off a lot of people. I mean, I piss off more than half the right-wing lunatics online. So yeah, sometimes some writing is meant to piss off people. So you shouldn't worry about that.
Cool. Padma has a question. We'll make that the last question, guys. What is the strategy to approach publishers when writing sensitive topics? You were mentioning networking. How do you network?
No, for sensitive topics, whatever topic it is, I believe that, like, try to get an agent is a good thing, I would say. I mean, 20 years ago, agenting was not big, but right now, it's always better to get somebody else to approach on your behalf than for you to to approach on your own. And the second thing is that, so for magazines, you can still do pitches on your own and, a lot of avenues. But when it comes to publishing and, chasing it up, it's a lot of work that you shouldn't be doing.
Right.
I believe that is a job of an agent. You get representation. You get representation also because you get a fair deal. You also get representation because you don't want to become like, somebody's so you don't want to become best friends with somebody, because you also don't want to become like, you don't want to know people that well, like, that allows you to keep distance. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm not a networker, so I cannot tell you. I mean, like, my understanding is, okay, I go to parties, I go to all these things, and I have fun with my set of friends. But because in 20 years of writing, I don't think meeting somebody and them saying hello to me and me saying hello to them, or somebody introducing us, has led to an opportunity. I have never looked for it, but I also can tell you that very empirically, that's not how things operate. At least for someone like me, it might operate differently for other people.
Sure.
So I always believe very honestly that the best thing that you can do is do the best writing. Just do the best writing, because that's what's going to stand after you. That's what's going to outlast you. And that the writing will always find a way. It's always going to find a channel. Maybe you're going to publish in a small place, but somebody else is going to amplify it. Maybe it's going to be like, like my first Ms Militancy is possibly my best-selling poetry book, published by a very small publisher. Like, it was one of the first 4 books that Navayana did. But that book became like this cult thing among college girls, like, okay, it's feminist and it's cool. So I mean, like, do your best work. I mean, like,
Right.
that necessity to network also becomes a kind of pressure in itself, right? And you don't need that. Like, you're a writer, you're supposed to be an antisocial person. I mean that it doesn't work for me. I mean, like, networking is something that, just meet nice people. I'm never saying don't meet nice people. Meet activists, meet people because they're nice in your life, not because someone's going to mystically lift you up. And I also have to say another word of caution here, which is that when I was very young, someone told this to me, that is, if somebody is trying to play God in your life, you have to run away in the opposite direction. If someone says, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to take care of your writing, I'm going to get you published, I'm going to do this, just be really careful. Make sure it's not your agent. Make sure it's not someone exploiting you, So yeah.
Great. That's that's a great place for us to close this session, because last Sunday we spoke with Chitra and she said exactly the same thing.
Who is this one? Chitra
Devakaruni.
Oh, okay. What did she say?
And she said, don't worry about publishing. Write the best book you can write. Focus on your craft. Tell great stories, and the publishing will happen. That's what she had said, and that's exactly what you've said. So I think twice in a row can't be a coincidence.
No, it's really true. It's really true. Otherwise, you become a very wannabe, right? Like,
yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Anyway, thank you so much. Lovely to meet all of you here.
Thank you, Meena. I will email you, and we will talk about your coming up to the retreat whenever is good for you, and we'll take it out from there. But thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and yeah, yes, absolutely.
Take care, guys. Bye bye.